brought up. One, that there is a tendency to view this as a service industry, and so there is a kind of pigeonholing that happens immediately, but also that a translator is a writer. And I'm going to touch upon that very soon because I think it's a very important point that you have made. But first, Sheela, I did want to ask you this. As someone who's seen her work translated into other languages, do you still feel intimately connected to a work that has been translated into another language? Or does your novel feel estranged from you? Do you feel as though it has become another being altogether once it has been translated into another language? Do you still feel connected to it?
Yes, of course. Actually, I feel connected to the translated book because as if it's my own book, but it's, it's a new book as such. I had the privilege to work with, I think, the two brilliant translators in our panel, and who translates from my mother tongue, Malayalam, into English, Jayasree and Ministry, and both of them are fantastic writers and translators at the same time. I think both of them have the mastery of both the languages and a passion for books, and they translate books what they really love. So I was fortunate to get my books in their love zone, and they have done a perfect work, as they have assimilated, or they have captured all the feelings, all the beauty of the language and the background, everything. I think I was fully satisfied with the work. So actually, it is transformed. When I first saw some chapters from, Valli, I have told Jayasree that, I couldn't stop reading it again and again because I was seeing it as a new book. But, and the same thing with the, Do Not Ask the River her name as well. The poems I have written in Malayalam in that book, Ministry has translated it into, English so beautifully that I was reading the poem as, this is written by someone else. So I think at the same time, it's a new work, but I have the attachment with it as my own book.
That's a lovely response. And I did want to ask you, Minnie, because I've had the privilege of working with you, but also as someone who's been part of this industry for a really long time, Minnie, I did want to ask you, what's the most common misconception you encounter regarding the art of translation?
Over the years, thank you for that question. It also goes back, it's a peg on which something which Jayasree mentioned. You see, the early translations were all about religion, philosophy. I'm talking about Indian transfers into English. And we kind of inherited the notion that the language has to be somehow elevated, like kind of Babu English. This perception actually misguided, almost waylaid very great translators. And then with that came, again, something that Jayasree said, that only academics could translate, only those who had in some way been trained in a particular way. But the academic mind is also a sort of certain framework. In fact, when I first looked for funding for translations in the mid-80s, the UGC said, yeah, fine, the money you want is nothing at all, we'll give it to you, but you may use only translators who are attached to universities. And I had to say no, because many translators are very creative, and in fact, far more creative than some of the academic translators who have worked with me, though they've been good too. They were not academics. So that was a huge wrench away from a certain kind of approach, a certain use of a certain kind of English. The bold, the experiments, moving away from Babu English, taking risks, all these things have come very recently, the last 20 years, I'd say. And those translators actually faced a lot of criticism is this English? Things like that. So that perception of language, it's only about language. That's one part. Very slowly. And also, the din in the market, the reviewers and the pressure, the perception that you have to, it's an encyclopedia. It's not about looking at dictionaries. You have to, it's all like an archaeology of culture, taking the whole land and moving it into another locale. That perception has come only very recently, luckily helped by a confidence with diaglossia, using two languages, using a lot of language words from the original. Sometimes it tends to be lazy because you can take that hop, step, and jump without struggling with the translation by just using the original word from the language which you translate. So these are the shifts, I'd say. Fear of using, the loss of fear of using a certain kind of stodgy, not stodgy, very, very overcorrect English. Like Narasimha once said, Indians don't talk, they converse. That and an understanding that you have to move the culture and not just the language. Language is only a tool. That change, and luckily for us, academics in the late 90s and early years of the 21st century picked that up. Those who were themselves teachers of literature, readers, some of them translators, luckily for us, because it's very difficult to get away from those norms, because you need to take these texts into classrooms, and that's always been my goal, that things will last, translations will last, publishers will keep books in print only if they go into the mainstream of English language courses, literature courses, culture studies, women's studies, and so on. They're all held hands. Translation has enabled all that. That has been the big shift. Not just entertainment, but for a purpose.
That's really interesting. Jayasree, what's the most common misconception you've encountered regarding the art of translation in your career?
Oh, I asked that question to various translators in the recent sort of diatribe article I wrote because I was very
It was a
upset
brilliant
about
article,
something.
by the way.
So I think mainly it is that people do think translation is an act of rendering a story from one language to the other. That's the sort of general idea that an ordinary person has of translation mostly, or even if their idea is more than that, this is what they are willing to acknowledge. So a lot of the questions you get as a translator when you're speaking to in a meeting or whatever, they posed in terms of challenges to you. So for instance, somebody will stand up in an audience and say, oh, so here is a sentence from VKN, translate it. And you're like, it's not a parlor trick. I'm not going to stand here and then translate this. And usually it is VKN or it is Bashir, Vaikam Muhammad Bashir. These are the two that is thrown at you as a challenge. But the idea that then you're trying to explain to people is that it's not just a question of whether these 5 words can be then put into English in a way that is still funny or poignant or whatever. It depends on what's around it. It depends on what is around that. It depends on what is trying to do in the page, in the book, in the chap, all of those things. So it's not like something that you are going to produce
Just
at whatever. So the idea that translation is rendering from one language to the other a story is, I think that is probably the most widely held misconception. And this is probably also what feeds into a lot of other ideas about how people value or devalue translators, or how they see translators, whether they are creative people or not. All of those stems from this, I think.
No, I'm glad you raised this point about, whether translation is taken seriously as a result of all of this, and that brings me really to my next question. Do you feel translation is given its due in the literary ecosystem. And I know you've spoken a great deal about this, Jayasree, and spoken vocally about it across newspapers and articles. But I do want to throw this question out to everyone, really. Do you think translation is given its due? Or do you think there's a lot of work still left to be done? And what are we to do, really, in the future if translation is to be taken seriously? I will start with Ministhy, and then I'll move on to Jayasree and then Mini.
I think the best way is to share some experiences I've had in this field. So sometimes, it's like throw and not tell. So in JCB, and I'm not going to demur from speaking this out. In the JCB award ceremony of 2021, Anti-Clocks was in the shortlist. We were all there. So M. Mukundan won the award for Delhi, that book. But then during the award ceremony, neither Nandakumar nor Fatima was called up to the stage. I mean, sitting in the audience, I felt humiliated. You understand? I mean, you are celebrating a book of translation. It will take you 2 minutes. It was a giant bench, all three of them standing up, one photograph, 1 minute, but they forgot. These are not mistakes. These speak about a deep understanding that this is a substandard sort of an art, right? So hopefully they learned, probably due to the feedback, and then they corrected it in the later years. But that spoke a volume about what the so-called highest awards also considered, the art of translation to be. I am always asked the question, so Mini, when do you start writing something of your own? Now I stopped answering that question. First I used to feel disgusted, then I tried to give explanations. Then I sort of, I play a trick question. I said, how much do you read? Have you ever read my translations? No. Then, they don't deserve my answer. So that is two, that, you're again some sort of a second class citizen in this great hierarchy of, we are not doing it for money. Nobody can live on translations. Let me tell you, we take precious time out of our home, out of our life and do it because for us, it's creative and it gives us joy. I mean, it's part of my ikigai, whatever it is, right? I have had experience where in 1.5 years of my life, 1,000 hours of my life, last minute, 1 week before submission, the author tells me, I don't like your translation. I mean, I'm, the trauma I went through, I ended up paying the money back to the publisher, the taxes I lost, but it was something much more deeper which happened. I started questioning my self-worth. I mean, it's not done, but then it is being done. What's a life lesson? After that, every author I work with, the first question I ask is, are you going to ditch me like a bad boyfriend or girlfriend at the last minute, or are you going to be a team? Right? I only work with authors who respect me. Trust me, 1.5 years of my life, 1 lakh words, 1 week before submission. Somebody says, I'll let you keep your book and your name, but I'll get it ghostwritten or ghost edited. I mean, I've gone through that humiliation too. And I'm speaking it out because it should not happen to anybody else. So respect is a fundamental thing. It's a creative art. I have struggled with my names in books. The first 2 books, and thanks to Mini, now our names have started appearing in the front. It came in the back. Now I've started emailing publishers. Can you make me more visible, please? Such a small font size. Forgive me. I mean, everything I do, but why do you take pleasure in making the font size? So my dream is of a day in which the font size is also the same on the cover. Thank you.
I hope that dream becomes reality very soon, because that's I think the least we can do by way of translation. It's the smallest act that we can render. Jayasree, what are your thoughts regarding this, regarding the place that translation holds in the literary firmament, and whether there are things that we can do to address the obvious issues that translators do confront on a regular basis?
Everything Ministry said completely rings a bell. That 2021 JCB prize, we were online and we could feel that, humiliation of not having those 2 translators, Fatima and Nandakumar, onto the stage. There's many such examples. The Madhurumi Book Award recently, where you had to raise your voice, etc. Now, people ask, why do you speak so much about money? Whether it is in terms of the money that is paid to you as a translator, or whether it is money that is awards money, etc. Right? My point is that Is it because you need the money? Of course I need the money. It's not like, I don't need the money. Just as an author might need the money that that person makes from his or her writing, I need the money from the translation that I do. But also, I think we probably have reached a point in the journey of the translation where the product, the translation, is dignified, it's accepted, etc. While the process and the person who's actually doing the actual crafting of that product are still sort of by the way, right? So one of the things, again, to go back to the JCB Prize, I will tell you, is that they have an online community on their website. It's called the JCB community. Translators are completely absent. We do not feature in the JCB Prize community, only the authors, including the long-listed, short-listed, everybody. But given that how many times out of the 6 awards or whatever translations have won the awards, we don't feature. So it's not a question of, oh, do I want to see myself on a website in a little photograph is beside the point. Do I want to get 1,000 rupees more than somebody else? That is beside the point. That is the point, but that is also beside the point, because that's how, in our world, dignity and respect is actually shown. So if you want my craft and my labor and my creative mind behind what I do, then there are ways in which to make that happen. So I think we have a little bit more to travel to where that reaches. People like Mini, who's worked at this for such a long time, in India, more than anywhere else in the world, we can now expect to see our names on the cover. In the UK, there is a campaign still going on, #translator on the cover, because they don't put the translators' names on the cover. So we have made strides thanks to people like Mini, but there's still so much more to go. And I wish authors would speak up more.
That's it.
That too. I wish authors would speak up more.
I was about to say that.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point, because at the end of the day, a translator and the author are on the same team, and we need authors to speak up as much as translators. Minnie, what's your view about this subject? Where does translation figure in the literary ecosystem? And if there are issues that translators confront, how can these issues be addressed?
I would blame publishers. I really put the blame on publishers. They have to play fair. How can you get a translation without the energy, the creativity, the blood that the translator pours into that product? Like you said, 1.5 years, 10 months, whatever. And you also have to, it's like marriage counseling. You have to make sure that that relationship works. If the author is no more, and if there's somebody from that family who's keeping track, that's a very, very delicate thing. But you also have a little more freedom. You also have greater responsibility because your authors are not there. If the author is alive, from the very beginning, you have to helicopter and make sure that that relationship is working. There should be no sharp edges, and you shouldn't allow injustice. I would never have allowed an author to say, I don't like your work, buzz off after. That is definitely the publisher's fault. Publisher, editor, whoever, they have to ensure equal terms, equal respect, and wherever, even a quotation in an article, stroke translator's name. Don't forget the translator's name. Just yesterday, was it? I can't remember. There was an article about today in today's Hindu. There's an article about the books that somebody has read, Gautam has read, and I noticed one of the books I did 5 years ago, Bhama's short stories. But Malini Seshadri's name is missing, the translator. Who made it possible? And most authors say, I felt I was reading myself again. What did Sheela say just now? I felt I was seeing myself anew. I felt connected. We feel connected. How? Through another language, a language you can't manage. So I feel very passionately about this. It is the responsibility of the publisher, the marketing team, the salespeople. When you go to offices of newspapers, media, say that, please make sure there's a photograph of the translator as well. You can't make him or her invisible. He or she is in that book, I told when Prabha Sridevan was translating Chodamani the first time, she said, should I do this? And what about her voice, my voice? I said, this is not just Chodamani's voice. It's Prabha's voice as well. It's definitely a dual it's a duo. It's a dance. It's a waltz of two people. You can't dance alone. Two hands clapping. So I am very clear on this, and things have definitely changed. Translators are in great demand. Literary agents are saying that translations are in greater circulation than original writing in English. I think that's a big step up. When I heard that a couple of maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was really thrilled because earlier, you had a conference where a translator got up to speak and people would just leave the room as if there's nothing to listen to. So I get really furious about it. Don't ask me, don't get me going on this. But I think
No, but
it's not changing.
your thoughts are so useful. And I think when we talk about this, what we hope is that somewhere along the way, we also sensitize readers to the contribution of translators, because very often that gets missed as well. And Minnie, I wanted to ask you this.
Just one more
How
point.
do you choose the books that you wish to see translated into English? Do you decide the books that you wish to see translated based on whether you feel passionate about the language it is in the original, or are there other factors that come into play?
Certainly other factors, because there's a huge range in a society like ours to be represented, fair representation. You see, publishing is an urban phenomenon, city phenomenon. So those who live in cities, and the writers in cities, translators in cities, easier for them to reach publishers, to be visible, to get the contacts. But there is a huge hidden history in rural India, semi-rural India, the small towns, wonderful stories and histories. If you haven't read Vanamala Vishwanatha's translation of Bride in the Hills, please read it. It's one of the most beautiful books because it covers a whole range of the village life and the Malnad, the forest, nature, and it's probably the best book I've read. So that to cover those aspects of the material aspects of our culture, as well as our history, our social history, I always look for things like that. Of course, it's great if it's a big name, and then so like to upset people a little in the sense, the hypocrisies in our society. If there's a book that explodes something like that or explodes it and critiques it, that then wonderful religious myths and legends, the way our writers critique those things, particularly from the feminist angle, I would be very keen to that. But just one other point, which I forgot to mention when you talked about the role of the translator. Why I say that it's important for translation to be established in academia. It will be very useful for students, and it's very exciting. I've seen it work, to have author and translator talk to them in classroom, in lecture halls or classrooms, to meet the translator, to meet the author, not only in literature festivals where everybody has a great time and has a great buzz and then goes home and forgets about it, but to be able for students to be inspired by writers and translators working together jointly. That's an angle that publishers should actually explore. Thank you for that question.
No, thank you for that suggestion. Sheela, I wanted to ask you this, and it's when you're working on a novel or any piece of literature, at the back of your mind, are you thinking about how well it'll translate into another language, into English or any other language? Or is that not a thought at all at the back of your mind when you are writing in Malayalam?
Yeah, before that, first of all, let me tell that I completely agree with all these, or three of them regarding the dignity of translators, which we should, the authors should speak for them. And I agree with them completely because, in my case, my debut novel was recognized, well in my mother tongue only after getting it translated. Then translators are doing a service, really, getting our work even familiar to our own audience in our mother tongue as well, and across the borders as well. And actually, while writing, I don't think about translation at all. And actually, when I wrote Valli, my debut work, I never had a thought of translation, and I was living with my characters, and my only concern was to do justice to my characters, my plot, to justice to the background, to my land, when Jaya said that she is interested in translating it, I was really, really very happy, and I could not express my gratitude because I wanted my story to travel beyond our borders. But in the second novel, Anadiyodu Peri Chodikkirathu, when I wrote that, that novel is discussing West Asian politics. So, we have got a lot of literature, Palestinian literature, written about the Palestinian struggles, all written by the Palestinian people with their own blood. So if it is, once if it gets translated, I should be, the work should be justified. So I was very, very conscious about, checking facts, and in that way, in the second work, I was little conscious, and I think Ministry has done a wonderful work with that, and she has gone through each and every aspect which has been discussed in the novel, and that is also, as a translator, they are doing double work. They are living the same life which we lived when we wrote the novel, and they have to do all the research which we have done, and their work has to be praised and to be appreciated more.
It's so wonderful to hear your response, and also to hear of your relationship with those who have translated you. One of my favorite writers actually is Anne Carson, and she translates very widely from Greek to English. And when she talks about, she was asked in a magazine interview about how she viewed the art of translation, and she was asked to describe it. And she said that to translate is to be in a room, not exactly an unknown room, it's a dark room, and you're groping for the light switch. She says then that human language does not come with a ready-made switch, and therefore to translate is to engineer little kidnaps in the dark.
Mhm.
I loved her description of it, translation being these little kidnaps in the dark. All of you are either translating or are aware of the art and craft of translation. If you had to describe the process of translation in a couple of sentences or even more, how would you go about it? Jayasree, starting with you.
I love Anne Carson, but I do not have a metaphor like she does for the process of translation. I mean, different people have called it different things. I think it was Jerry Pinto who talked of himself as a translator, as a boatman who rows people across a river. There's all kinds of different things. I think for me, essentially, it is an idea. The idea of illuminating that works for me because it is an idea of illuminating it in the sense of making meaning in a different context, a different language, a different everything, but it still makes as much meaning. The essence remains, or as much as you can with all of this. So there is a certain aspect of illuminating going on. But for me, the act is a meticulous act, not a metaphoric act of, very time consumingly rewriting an entire book. That's what it is essentially for me, and then in that process, you are consciously and carefully choosing every single word, every single punctuation mark, every single thing that makes a book read as good as it is in the original. So for me, it is a meticulous act of recreating a book, rewriting a book. And that's all I have, no metaphors.
You don't need metaphors sometimes, because when you describe the craft, that itself is such a powerful description. Minnie, do you have anything to say about this? If you had to describe the art and craft of translation, how would you go about it?
Yeah, I did use, I don't know if you call it a metaphor or simile, metaphor really, years ago when I wrote an article. I said it's like in Star Wars, you spot a new a planet or something, and then you have to adjust. You don't know how to land. Can I do this? Can I do that? And then entering that space. I think when I watch a translator draft after draft, going closer and closer, sometimes going back to the first draft, saying that this didn't work. Shall we do it this way? And also when I edit and we move closer and closer, it reminds me of that. And it's like two different worlds, and they come closer, slowly closer and closer and closer. These two world languages, two different worlds, because every language really is a world. You point to something and say, that's a hibiscus. So then it becomes a hibiscus. So that way, the way you name everything, the way you transfer, translocate, transform. I think after all these years, the thing I really like to consider a translator as is a transformer. He or she transforms. Transform. And I was trying to get that thing from Jhumpa Lahiri's book. She said, there's a fabulous chapter in it about celebrating echo or something like that. And echo is actually punished. And Jhumpa points out, I can't remember the exact words, but she says, it's just a starting point for a translator. It's not a punishment. It's actually a joy. You have half the words, you have half the picture, you have half of everything, and you have to complete it. And it's a joyful completion because it's a creation. So translator has to be as creative, I would say, even more creative. I know I'll upset a lot of writers when I say this, but a translator has to be, I think, even more creative than the original writer, because in the original language, there's this huge sweep of energy and creativity, and you just write. But the translator has to stop and pause, stop and move, stop and move. Sometimes they move fast, sometimes you have to move back, you have to jump this way, jump that way. It calls for a lot of creativity, a lot of imagination.
And hence they are transformers. I love that word. Ministhy, how would you describe the art of translation?
See, I'm fundamentally a bureaucrat now, so I do this turn that senior commissioning editor, I turn my weakness into my strength. So I have two biblical metaphors here. I did a little homework. So I found that in 1 Corinthians 12:10, they speak of this gift of translation. To another, the working of miracles. To another, prophecy. And goes on and on. To another, various kinds of tongues. And to another, the gift of interpretation of tongues. So for me, this is a gift of interpretation of tongues. What the oracle says, you have to speak in a language which the common man understands, and it is acknowledged. I will take it to something Father Bobby Jose Katikad. He's a great writer, speaker. Yesterday he was speaking about translation. So he said, in English, it is gospel as per according to Matthew, gospel according to Luke. In Malayalam, when they translated it, it became Matthew in the Suvishesham, Luke in the Suvishesham, became Matthew's gospel, Luke's gospel. The whole meaning changes. So if you link it to my translation of Sheela, it is a gospel of Sheela's book according to Ministry. I bring in all my prejudices, my understanding. It is my reading of the text, If Jayasree were to do the same book, it will be the gospel as per Jayasree, right? So we are bringing in our gifts, but then all the human flaws which we have, our strength or weakness is reflected in it.
I love that, the gospel according to the translator. That's lovely.
That's absolutely lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. We have entered a brave new world today where we see the emergence of AI. Does the emergence of AI at all worry you as translators? And Sheela, would you turn to AI to translate your own work? So maybe I'll start with Sheela and then I'll move to the rest. Sheela, would you turn to AI to translate any of your work?
No, not at all. I know that AI cannot do my work. I'm 100% sure.
No?
No.
And the rest, do you want to start, Ministry? Does the emergence of AI worry you as a translator?
I read something very interesting on Instagram recently. So it's a brilliant artist. She says, I would like AI to do my laundry and clean my vessels and leave me to do my art and my writing. I loved it.
No, that's absolutely true. Why is AI encroaching upon the arts? But Jayasree, what do you feel about the emergence of AI?
I feel that we are in a context where it is raising hugely ethical and moral questions. It is going to test us as humans and where we are going to stand, because it is not just a question of whether AI can do a good translation or not. It is about what it means to be human, really. So, in that sense, we'll have to. I mean, there is not only is that I'm ever going to use AI to do my writing, and I'm not just saying translation because that's just one type of writing I do. Uh, but I am also actively part of, trying to raise the voice against the use of our copyrighted material in so-called quote unquote training AI, and the usage of human language to describe machine, all of those hugely moral and ethical issues. So
In fact, it's a very important point you just made about AI and feeling. And there was an interview I was watching recently where they said that, sure, AI can get the technicalities correct language, but can it actually miss someone? Can it actually sense loss? Can it grieve? And if it cannot grieve, and if it cannot sense loss, and if it cannot feel, there are limits to what it can do. Minnie, what do you feel about the rise of AI today? And do you think that it threatens the possibility of translating literature or the work of translators?
Any disruption must be viewed with some caution and fear. I think it's a tool. It depends on how you use it. Just yesterday, I was talking to the joint director of this, the Tamil Nadu project that I do, and he said somebody had taken a quotation from the Quran and couldn't quite get the meaning. So he sat with him and he worked for 2 hours. He did 8 or 9 versions. And finally, the gentleman at the other hand said, "This is really beautiful. I really understand now." And it is a translation which is nearly as good as the original. So it depends on kind of questions you ask. It depends on how you use it. And it can take a very long time if you want a really perfect translation of, say, a poem. It's a tool, it has no understanding. So it depends on how you use it. I think to proof a text, perhaps, it would be extremely useful. When it comes to creativity, that too it is capable of doing. But the problem is the question of ethics. Whose work is it eventually? That is where the integrity, honesty, ethics, this is the point that is going to be challenged. So there, you publishers have to worry. We've all for years seen ghostwriting. This is ghostwriting at a ferocious speed and quantity. So does it worry me? Yes and no. If you can use it for its good aspects to check certain things, I think you can. It would be useful, but it cannot replace, I think, the human imagination, right? So I myself haven't used it. I'm only familiar with people who have and had these discussions. So that's my contribution to this point.
Thank you. No, thank you. And I like how you mentioned the fact that, the human imagination holds a certain place, and it'll be very hard for AI actually to match that. The other big issue, of course, that we face today is one of piracy. And there are hours of labor that go into producing any work of literature. And then you have piracy, which sort of undermines a lot of the work that has gone into creating a book, a novel, a poem. What message would you have for our viewers regarding piracy and also about respecting creative work? I'll start with Ministhy and I'll move on to each of you in turn. So Ministhy, what are your thoughts on piracy and what would you like to caution people about?
If I were to explain this concept to a class of, let's say, a high school student, what is the simplest way of explaining it to them? I was thinking when you gave the question. It's nothing but stealing, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
It's as simple as that. I mean, I work hard, I'm paid 100 rupees, right? You take it, you put a PDF in a chore channel, and you make money out of the advertisements, So it is stealing. So it's a question of fundamental ethics. It should not be done.
That's true. And Minnie, and then Jayasree, and then Sheela.
We've all been victims of it. A best-selling textbook or a little anthology that's prescribed somewhere, or even a whole series can be completely wiped out by piracy. I don't know how that comes into our discussion about translation, Dharini. So I mean, as a publisher, it's the thing I fear the most. Huge salaries, royalties, a whole lot of work, hours of work, just swept away, just as if you left the door open or somebody's broken in and taken something away. Stealing, yeah, it's theft, it's larceny. I don't know how to protect as such. I don't know what the mechanics are. And if someone can take a book and just scan the whole thing and put it there. So, but the other thing is, it's not just plagiarism. There's something else I have to say. A lot of people don't respect copyright in other ways, but it is out of a certain ignorance or innocence. They see a story or a poem on an online journal and think that it's perfectly all right to take it and put it into a book. Or someone, I warn translators over and over again, don't translate till you're sure that you've got permission. I know Sarah Joseph has suffered a lot. And her early story, 4 or 5 people will be translating simultaneously, and it will appear here, appear there. And finally, a big publisher wants to bring it out and look at copyright and things, and she finds that there are 5 different versions of it. So this is something people have to be careful about. It's not just plagiarism, it's respecting the intellectual property of the writer. So another dreadful thing that happens is that when a script is rejected, everybody forgets about it. But somebody somewhere picks it up and someone else looks at it and makes a few changes and submits it elsewhere and it's published. No less a writer than H.G. Wells actually has been accused of it. An American woman actually wrote The Short History of the World and it was rejected. H.G. Wells picked it up, did all sorts of things to it and published it with his name.
Jayasree, what do you have to say about piracy and how it impacts creative work?
Yeah, so I think in my own lifetime, this idea of piracy has changed because there were days when it was, in traffic junctions when you're waiting for the light, somebody comes with a very badly produced, cheaply printed version of a book, and that you buy for 20 rupees or 10 rupees or whatever. To now PDFs being happily just sent around in WhatsApp groups and wherever else, and people just calling you up. I get several messages on Messenger and from complete strangers saying, "Please send me the PDF of Mudritha," as though this is just whatever. So things have changed. So I also have because the whole piracy thing with the cheaply produced books, etc., pointed to a parallel economy where buying books was not something that everybody could do. It catered to a certain class of people who would still like to read but couldn't afford the 650 rupees for Wali, etc. So they had to depend on the non-copyrighted, non-royalty paying cheap version of the book. We also live in a time when libraries are closing. People do not have much access to libraries. Sharing of books is changing because now when you buy ebooks or whatever, you cannot, more people are reading Kindle or ebook and you cannot really share it like I would buy a book and I would share it with my friend saying this is a good book and read this, and she would buy something else. And so we're not buying all the books. Everybody's buying different things and we're all sharing. So there is an economy of reading that goes hand in hand with the economy of publishing and of copyright and of us getting our due as writers, etc., which I think publishers also need to at some point address. If piracy is, if you are going to address piracy, it is not just by saying this is wrong, this is illegal, this is ethical. It's only by addressing this parallel economy of who gets to read, who has the privilege to read. That's a question we need to ask, right? And we talked about AI before. Many of the big publishers are happily giving rights to AI companies to all of our copyrighted material without our permission or paying us copyright to train AI. While they have problem that some enterprising fellow in Andheri is using a cheap print to print out a 20 copies of Valli and sell it for 20 rupees. See, I would rather him do that, rather my copyrighted material go to an AI training company without my permission. If you're going to give that, then publishers should give us a copyright for, they should demand copyright from the big AI companies. While the people are printing cheap copies of books, chalega. I mean, in my honest opinion, it's okay as far as I'm concerned. And I don't know what massive percentage of our income is collapsing because some people are producing a few cheap copies of the books. This is how I see it. It is a question of who has the privilege to read.
That's such an important question, right? Who really has the privilege to read? We assume everyone does, but it really is a privilege. Sheela, what do you have to say about piracy, the sprout of piracy, and what's your response to it? And I'll then move on to the next question.
Yeah, recently, I had an experience like, one of the lecturers from a university in Kerala, she asked me to send PDF of my book, and Adiyodu Peri Chodikiruthu. Do not ask her name, because she wants to teach the students, that text is taken to as a paper. 3 chapters of the book is taken as a paper in the university, and she's asking for the PDF. And I told her, I cannot send you PDF. You can just get the book. It's like, in their town there is a bookshop. You can just go and get it. And a teacher and a lecturer, she is asking for the PDF. See, if the teachers are doing that, then what about others? This is, they are not understanding this is a theft, and this is an intellectual property they are stealing, or they are doing harm to not only to the to the writers or the publishers. They are making a bad practice. They are giving a bad practice to the students as well.
What about Xeroxing?
Yeah,
Entire texts.
Yes.
They take 10 short stories, one from this person, one here, they
Yeah.
box it and make up a little textbook, and they sell it. They sell it to their students.
Yeah, I think I lost a reader by saying her that I won't send you the PDF.
Which brings me to my last question today, and it's a question that is as much for me as it is for those who are viewing this. If each of you could recommend 2 works of translation from any language to English, what would they be? I'll start with you, Jayasree, then move on to Ministry, then Sheela, and then Minnie. So Jayasree.
And here I was getting ready to write down everybody's, recommendations so I can read them.
I do want to add, you can mention your own books. I mean, it's absolutely okay to recommend your own books. So yeah, but 2 recommendations.
Okay, so the first I want to recommend is so this year's Popular Choice Translation Award, Crossword Book Award, Popular Choice, Charu Nivedita's Conversations with Aurangzeb, translated by Nandini Krishnan. I love this book because it completely changes the whole idea of there is an original and there is a translation. It's because the Tamil was being written as well as when the translation is going forward. HarperCollins is in the book, Udayan Mitra is in the book, the editor is in the book. And, so it's that whole conversation between a writer and a translator who is another writer, and the process of making a new book out of another language book. So apart from the story and everything else, all of this. So I really love that. The other is the book Whale. It's a Korean novel by Cheong Myung Kwon, written in 2004, translated by Chin Young Kim in 2023, which was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize. This is, I like books like Mustache because I translated it. This is that kind of book where it just bonkers, but it is beautiful. So you just, I mean, it is big also. Bonkers, big, and beautiful. I like books like that. So there you go.
The three Bs. Yeah. Ministry, I love those recommendations, and I've read Conversations with Aurangzeb, and I'm with you. Ministry,
Yeah,
would you have two recommendations?
right. I've got two books. One is Arunava Sinha's translation of Ravi Shankar Bal's book, Dozaknama, 2017. It's Conversation in Hell. It's the entire Urdu literature, the world of Urdu literature brought alive for you. There is Manto, Vismat Chuktai, there is Ghalib, and it connects eras of Urdu literature and the trial of obscenity. It's absolutely wonderful. I just loved it. So Ravi Shankar Bal's book, Dozaknama, translated by Arunava Sinha, all-time favorite. And second is Han Kang's book, translated by Deborah Smith, but not the vegetarian, the white book. The white book, I started underlining, I underlined, and I ended up underlining the whole book. It was so beautiful because, to leave things unsaid is an art in original writing, but capture it in translation. I mean, that book, it was so beautiful. Solitude, pain, agony, and it's like every single sentence ended up underlining. So that's again an all-time favorite. Deborah Smith, white book, Han Kang is the author.
I'm going to look out for that one. Sheela, do you have two recommendations?
I will recommend two books translated from Malayalam into English. I am a little selfish about this. One is one book translated by Ministry into English recently, Exodus. It's Purapadinte Pustakam in original. It was written 25 years back, and that was one of the books, which I liked very much at that time, which, made me write something in the year 2000. So the second book, one of the Malayalam book, Mudritha, translated by Jayasree into English recently. And it's a very beautiful book of, the women, about women life. And you can see different, 9 different women and their lives and their, it's a beautiful book.
I love those recommendations. And finally, Minnie, do you have two books?
Yes, I do. One is the Tamil story, 88 short stories, a very good representation, selected by Dilip Kumar himself, a writer, and translated by one of the most elegant translators, Subhrashri Krishnaswamy. She doesn't translate as a rule, but she worked on this. It was published in 2016. And this book, which I already mentioned, Kuvempu's Bride in the Hills, translated by Vanamala Vishwanatha. It's difficult for me to describe this book. I just wish everybody would read it, because it's a real experience. It is really entering a world which all books, but this was with all the books I've read, all the translations I've read, I'd say that this was I really forgot myself reading this book. In fact, I haven't finished reading it. Thank you.
These are such valuable recommendations. And
Dharini, can I just say that I'm just received these
Okay.
Minnie, and I'm really looking forward to them because it's like a treasure house.
Thank you.
And hopefully other languages are coming as well, right?
Tamil, Telugu, and Bengali next.
Oh yeah.
More power to you.
No, these are very special books, and I feel like each of you has done such remarkable work in this space, both as writers and as translators. And I think as readers and as publishers, we have gained by having you around. So thank you very much, and thank you for this wonderful discussion. It has opened doors and windows, and it has made us think about things that I think very often we brush under the carpets. So thank you very much for this. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Dharini. Thank you,
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Bye.